Okay, let's go on to part 6, perception, positioning, and self-image in selling. Here is one of the great breakthroughs in selling. This chapter can often be, and often is in my estimation, the most important part of this seminar, especially in dealing with selling, because as Theodore Levitt said, all sales for the rest of our lives are relationship sales. All selling is relationship selling. Your ability to understand the dynamics of relationships in selling will make you one of the top people of your field. So things we know, number one, is relationships often continue after the sale. Relationships often continue after the sale. Let me give you a quick explanation. We used to have what is called a single call sale. 99% of all sales books are written around the single call sale. The single call sale was based on the AIDA model, AIDA, which stood for attention, interest, desire, action. You said or did something to arouse the person's attention. You aroused their interest by explaining the features. You aroused the desire by explaining the benefits that derive from those features. And you got them to take action. The single call sale, the simple sale, was also one call, one decision maker, one decision, in, out, thank you, wham, bam, in and out, hit and run, lock and load, touch and go, very quick. And you never had to see the person again. That was just the way the simple sale worked. Many people still attempt simple sales selling when we moved into a new world called complex selling. And complex selling is where you have to see the customer several times to make a single sale. Customers in this format are far more valuable and expensive, and so each call is part of a process that moves you closer to the sale. And then once the sale takes place, the sale goes on after the sale. In other words, it's not over. In fact, salespeople say that they've closed a sale, but as far as the customer is concerned, we've begun a relationship. Professionals now realize that we don't close a sale, we simply officially begin a sales relationship. This is called complex selling. In complex selling, there's multiple calls, and the word is multiple. There's multiple calls, there's multiple decisions that have to be made, smaller decisions, and there's multiple decision makers, any one of which can foul up the sale, as you know. And then the sale goes on afterwards. One of the things that we know is that the relationship is extremely important at the beginning of the multiple call sale, and then it goes underground, almost like an underground river, and then it emerges again later at the time of making a purchase decision, and is usually the critical factor. It is first of all established, and then it's given, and then it becomes critical. And so when a person says, no, I don't think I'll buy it, and they are qualified and they need it, what they're saying is, I don't think I will get into this buying relationship with you. And in the final analysis, this becomes the most important thing in the large sale because the sale goes on. If you buy a newspaper, it doesn't matter whether you like the person or not because you never have to see them again. If you buy something that's complicated and that requires follow-up service and so on, then it makes a lot of difference. So number 2, the decision to buy your products or services in most cases means the decision to enter into a long-term relationship. The decision to enter into a long-term relationship simply means a business marriage. Up to now, we've been dating because that's all the various calls have represented, and now you want to get married. You want to go away for the weekend. You want to get married, buy a home, settle down, have kids. And there's an awful lot of people who are in relationships, but when they look at them hard and fast, they're not deep enough in them that they want to get married and live with this person for life. And what you're doing is you are asking the person to enter into a business marriage. And in a marriage, there are several factors that come in. Number 1, in the customer's mind, is the whole issue of dependency. You see, up to now, I can take you or leave you. But if I decide to go ahead, now I'm dependent on you to deliver. I'm dependent upon you to come through on your promises. I'm dependent upon you to take care of me. And quite honestly, I've been burned countless times by other customers or other suppliers, and I don't know if I feel secure depending on you in this relationship. Has anybody here ever bought something and turned out it was so hard to get it serviced or repaired you wish you never bought it at all? Every customer you talk to has had 100 experiences like that, and they don't want it to happen again. So therefore, you are proposing a business marriage. In proposing a business marriage, your whole approach to the sale from the very beginning must be different than if you're just going to go in, make the sale, and leave. Number 3 is the customer wants a relationship first. Here's a question for you. Is your product or service available anywhere else? Can a person buy it from you, buy it from somewhere else, or not even buy it at all? Yes. Of course. So therefore, the product or service is not the issue. It is not as if you have an exclusive product or service like a remedy for an incurable illness that only you have that the person must have. What you have is a product that's available elsewhere at different prices, in different quantities and qualities, etc., etc., etc. So the customer now has the product as a given. The product's a given. There it is. Now I have to decide whether it's you I want to get it from. And that is why from the very first contact and throughout the sales relationship, you must be alert to this dynamic. The customer wants a relationship first. We have what is called in selling and in personal relationships the law of indirect effort. Now, the law of indirect effort says that you get almost everything in your relationships with others indirectly rather than directly. If you want to have a friend, you have to be a friend. If you want to have people respect you, you have to respect them. If you want people to like you, you have to like them. If you want people to be impressed by you, you have to be impressed by them. The law of indirect effort. In selling, we say, here's you, and here's the sale. Now, and here's the relationship. I call this one bank in the corner pocket. If you aim directly at the sale, oblivious to the relationship, it's very unlikely the sale will take place unless the customer is desperate. However, if you focus on the relationship like one bank, the sale will usually take care of itself. Here's a great rule. If this customer likes you, the details will not get in the way of a sale. If the customer doesn't like you, the details will trip you up every step of the way. Liking is one of the most powerful of all influence triggers in selling. If the customer genuinely likes you, they tend to see your product or service as better than it is and more worth what you're charging than if they don't like you. If they don't like you, your product or service is much more questionable and appears to be overpriced. Liking distorts like a lens. It distorts the way we see the product, the service, and the salesperson. So you must focus on the relationship first. Remember we said rapport, problem, solution. You must establish rapport before you go to identifying the problem. You must build a bridge. Number 4 is, because of product service complexity, the relationship is actually more important than the product or service. Because I don't know what is inside your box. In fact, your job and my job is the sale of promises. You are just like the old priests used to go through the streets of medieval Europe, and they would sell indulgences. An indulgence was basically a ticket to go to heaven when you died. And the wealthy were forced to pay enormous amounts of money for indulgences. The poor were forced to pay whatever they could for indulgences, and priests basically ran their parishes by selling indulgences, tickets to heaven. That's what made Martin Luther so mad. He said, this is dreadful. This is not in the Bible, this is not in Christianity, and so on. And so he began the Reformation with his edicts on the church in Worms. The point is that you and I go out and we sell promises. And what we say is, you give me a check, which I can take down and cash, and I'll give you a promise. The promise will be that the product or service that I promise you will be delivered, it will work, it will be serviced, I will back it up, and you will even see me again. We will respond to your phone calls. We will carry out our guarantees and warranties under the contract. In other words, it's all promises. Do you know how hard it is to talk people out of their money on any basis, much less in exchange for promises? So you have one of the toughest jobs in America. You're out there selling promises in exchange for money. Therefore, the person has to be very confident in you that what you say is true. Because if what you say is true, I want the benefits that your product or service represents. I, the customer, I just have to be sure that I'm going to get them, and that hangs on my feeling about you. Every one of us has made a wrong decision. We have trusted in a person, and turned out we had misplaced our trust. Have you had that? Everybody's been burned that way. So remember, the customer wants the relationship first, and if you're smart enough to focus on the relationship, I'll give you some words to use. There's several words that you can use, but remember, don't ever expect the customer to figure things out for themselves. Are people busy or just hanging around? Are good customers busier than non-customers? Of course. They have 1,000 things in their mind. What does that mean? It means don't expect them to figure out stuff through osmosis. Women will often say to a man, "Tell me what you're feeling." And he'll say, "Nothing." And she'll say, "No, you're not being honest with me. Tell me what you're really feeling." Well, ladies, I have news for you. Men's inner lives are very simple. We're not thinking about anything. We're thinking about whether or not you're blocking the television. But we're not thinking about anything. Women's inner lives are very rich. Women's inner lives are far more sensitive and aware of countless things. A man and a woman can meet in a social gathering with others, and afterwards she can give the most incredible recounting of all the dynamics going on amongst the other people. He didn't see a damn thing. It's because women have a sensitivity in relationships that is uncanny. I mean, it is amazing. And it's in relationships, in business relationships, often we have a feeling that the customer should figure these things out. I mean, the customer should know from the way I am that this is the way I feel and so on. But you must never surmise that. It'd be the same as if a woman said, "You don't have to tell me you love me anymore. You told me once when we got married. That's fine. I know it from now on." Try getting away with that. In the age of Lorena Bobbitt, gentlemen, I would suggest... And a total acquittal, you see. It was not, a minor sentence. It was an acquittal. Not good. The point is this, is that the way that you tell your customers that you consider a relationship to be important is you tell them that you consider the relationship to be important. And how do you tell people you love them? They'll tell you with words. And follow up the words with actions, but start off with the words. Let's get on with the words first, okay? Use the words. And when you sell your customer, my philosophy is that I want to enter into a long-term relationship with you. I want to be your supplier in this area for as long as you use these products or services. And this is my company's philosophy as well, and we will do whatever it takes within reason to establish a long-term relationship with you and to make it work. If you tell a customer that, which is the truth, this is what you believe, and the competitor does not, who do you think has the edge in that sale? Of course you do. Because I would much rather take a person who may not have the better product, but who's totally committed to a relationship with me, to a long-term relationship, than someone else who may have a better product, but as far as they're concerned, it's a matter of indifference. Deming said the most important movement in business today is to single supplier relationships. It's not to put out bids and get half a dozen bids and pick the best bid every time you buy something, but it's to enter into long-term relationships with our suppliers and deal only with them and establish a very high quality of awareness and knowledge with a single supplier so they work with us to help us get the very best. Some companies are now actually putting a full-time person in the premises of their major customers who just works there and lives there and works with the customers all the time to make sure that their needs are handled well, that the relationship is taken good care of. So think in terms of the relationship and tell them you consider the relationship to be important. And you will do anything within reason to maintain a high-quality relationship. And when you say the relationship is important, if a person is really important to you and they call you, what do? You call them right back. And you get them on an answering machine and they buzz you and page you and you call them back from overseas. In other words, act like the relationship is important. Once you've said it, okay, now you've said it, now engage in the behaviors that tell me that you really meant it. I accepted that what you said was true, now engage in the behaviors. So, the key reasons for buying, based on our interviews with thousands of customers, why did you buy this rather than that? Or from him or her, rather than from him or her, this is what they say. The key reasons for buying are, first of all, reputation. Reputation is the number one reason why people buy. What is the major sales promotional device in America? It causes more sales than anything else. Word of mouth it is. Word of mouth is number one. Theodore Levitt says the company's most valuable asset is its reputation. It's how it is known to its customers. It's its word of mouth. It's what people say about it. So therefore, don't be afraid to emphasize your reputation. We'll come back to that in a minute. Services are important. Delivery, reliability, responsiveness, and the quality of interactions over time. So therefore, it is not just one meeting, but it is the average quality of the interactions that you have with a customer over time. Is every interaction with you a good one? Is it a positive one? Are you pleasant, cheerful, responsive? You get back as quickly as you say you will? Do you fulfill your promises and commitments? Over time, the relationship is important. One of the studies, and I paid about $300,000 for sales research over the last few years. I've paid a fortune for this. It breaks my heart. But I still have stuff that I've bought that I could do courses on that would knock your eyes out in terms of why people buy and how to sell to people of all ages, educations, income levels, positions in the hierarchy, and so on, how each person has a different psychographic profile with a hot button that you can push to cause a sale to take place. I know neat stuff. But here's one of the things that I did learn is that there's a principle in professional selling called relationship consistency. And what it is that however you are the first time you meet the customer, you are always that way. If you dress properly the first time, you always dress properly. If you're punctual, you're always punctual. If you're friendly, cheerful, and well-prepared, you're always friendly, cheerful, and well-prepared. In other words, you are consistent over time. This is a major credibility factor on the part of the customer, is that you're an absolutely reliable quantity. I can absolutely depend on you. I know that you are always what you are. Everybody here has had relationships with people who are all over the map. Each time you meet them, you have no idea where they're coming from. They're virtually like space cadets. You know, as they say in the South, their grits ain't in the middle of the plate. And you also have friends that are as consistent as can be. They're always the same. Now, who are your most precious friends? It's always those people that you can always count on. And so therefore, consistency of interactions over time, relationship consistency is very important. Very important for the long term. Now, number 6, here's an important point. With larger sales, that means with lots more money involved. Number 2, with more people involved, and more people will be affected. And with a longer life of the product, in other words, once you've bought it, you've stuck with it for a while, or with a first-time buyer. The customer has never bought your product before or has never bought it from you. Either are serious, then the critical variable, as we talked about earlier, is the variable of risk. Today, risk is the major factor in modern selling. It's not product availability, it's not money. People say, well, we can't afford it. Here's a very good line, by the way, a very good comeback. Stop, smile, look them right in the eye and say, Mr. Prospect, you could afford it if you really wanted it, couldn't you? They just collapse. Of course they can. Virtually anybody can afford it. Ability to buy and willingness to buy are two separate categories. So people say, I can't afford it. It means that I'm not willing to buy it at that price. If you said you could afford it, if your life depended upon it, you could afford it, couldn't you? If you really wanted it, you could afford it, couldn't you? A person will say, yes, if I really wanted it, of course I could afford it. So that's really the question, isn't it? What is it that holds you back? What is it about what I'm offering you that causes you to hesitate? And often they'll tell you. You'll be straight with them, they'll be straight with you. Do you know what? People love it when people are straight with them. And don't be afraid to be straight with customers. Just tell them straight, I really want to make this sale. And I really don't know how to approach it because you told me you want to think about it, but you haven't given me an answer or told me what part of it you wanted to think about. In other words, be perfectly straight. Can you help me here? They'll say, okay. If you don't try to be a super person, then they'll treat you straightforwardly and honestly as they would treat a friend. Or you could even say to them, treat me as though I was your friend. And if I was your best friend and I was trying to sell you this and I wasn't having any luck, what would you tell me about what I'm doing or not doing? Don't be afraid to ask. If somebody said that to you, wouldn't you tell them? You'd say, well, since you mentioned it, I will tell you. You're charging twice as much. You're offering half as much. Your company has been taken over by the sheriff, and you're all going to jail. And you've stolen 3 of my ashtrays since you arrived here. Risk is the critical variable in modern selling, and your goal is to minimize not risk so much, but the perception of risk. The perception of risk. Remember, for the customer, perception is reality. The customer may perceive risk where no risk exists. But if the customer's never bought the product before, is that risky? To do something you never bought before? To move out of your comfort zone? To risk failure? Is that a risky thing to do? And if you've never done it before, no, if you've done it a dozen times before, it's easy as pie to make the buying decision. So always ask people, have you ever bought one of these before? If they say no, then you know the perception of risk is very high. Number 7, the main obstacles to selling. The main obstacles to selling today are our old friends. A, the fear of failure. The fear of failure is experienced by the customer. It's 80% of the reason why people don't buy, is the fear of failure. As I said before, everybody has made bad buying decisions. Did you ever buy something and find it for sale for less somewhere else? Did you ever buy something and have somebody else tell you, geez, you didn't buy that, did you? Nobody buys those anymore. They're all buying these. Did you ever buy something and have it break and you couldn't get it fixed? Did you ever buy something and the company rattled you around, didn't return your phone calls? I mean, everybody has had bad buying experiences. From the time you bought your first little toy when you went shopping with your mother and she allowed you to buy something cheap which broke by the time you got it home, you have had bad buying experiences, and you have one common reaction to every buying experience. Do you know what it is? Damn it, this is not going to happen to me again. Next time I'll be smarter. It makes you mad. Isn't that true? It makes you mad. So, what you do is you realize everyone you speak to has this fear of failure. Now, B, the major reason why salespeople don't sell is the fear of rejection, which is 80% of the reason why salespeople don't sell. Now, the worst of all, of course, is when the salesperson who's paralyzed by the fear of rejection meets the customer who's paralyzed by the fear of failure. Now, here they are. It's 2 of them. It's like 2 muggers in an alley. Which direction do we go? This is my territory. So we have developed a series of rituals. Do you know what the rituals are? The rituals are, I won't reject you if you don't force me to risk failure. So the deal is, I won't ask you for the order if you don't tell me no. So at the end of a sales conversation, we go into our little dance. Well, what do you think? Well, I think it looks really interesting. Well, good. Well, why don't I leave you some information and you can look it over? Thank you. You leave me some stuff and I'll look it over. And I'll talk it over with someone else. And okay, and I'll get back to you. And okay, and I'll get back to you. And, you know, we'll keep in touch down the years. And I'll send Christmas cards to you. And if there's any changes, I'll let you know. Okay, well, that's good. And so we back out like this, very carefully. Our egos are so sensitive. We're like balloons in a porcupine pen. You know, we're so sensitive about our egos. And we work our way out. And the customer doesn't have to reject us, and we don't have to hear no, and we don't have to, and we flee, and the last thing we hear as we go down the hallway is the sound of our sales materials dropping into the customer's wastebasket. And then the customer goes into, or the prospect, not a customer, the prospect goes into a 3-year meeting. You know what a 3-year meeting is, don't you? You've been calling for 3 years, and the prospect is still in a meeting. I'm sorry, he's in a meeting. You mean he didn't call you back? Well, I gave him your message. I'm really surprised he doesn't call you back. He usually calls all of his calls back. Well, as a matter of fact, he's coming out of his meeting right now. He's just going back into another meeting. He's really busy. Well, you know, why don't you leave your name and number again, and I'll pass it on to him, etc., etc., etc. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, what happened was there was no resolution, no conclusion, no perceived advantage on the part of the customer or the prospect in dealing with you anymore, and the customer has no desire to see you anymore. Many reasons for that. Okay, so how do we allay this? Well, the antidote to these fears is the new model of selling. Number 8, it's the new model of selling. And this new model of selling is the model that we find is being used by the top 10% of salespeople in virtually all industries, all products, all services worldwide. And I do sales seminars now. I was in Europe recently, and I did a sales seminar, a series of sales and management seminars in Holland, all day in Holland. And then I flew to Slovenia, Ljubljana in Slovenia, which is to the north of the old Yugoslav Republic and to the south of Austria and abuts on Italy. If your geography is any good, I spoke all day in Slovenia, then drove 5 hours to Vienna, all the way across Slovenia and Austria, and spoke all day in Austria, a sales and management seminar. Then I flew to Belfast, spoke all day in Belfast. Then I flew to Dublin and spoke in Dublin, Waterford, and Cork. Then I flew back through Heathrow via Frankfurt to Munich and spoke all day in Munich. And then I drove another 5 hours across Austria and into Italy and spoke all day in Italy on the following day. That's 8 days, 9 countries. And you know something? Relationship selling is the key to effectiveness in every country, every culture, every language. That's why this program, by the way, is in 14 languages worldwide, because it bridges all the cultures. And that's why you're going to enjoy what we're going to talk about now. This is neat stuff. Got it. Okay, the old model of selling, you see we have 2 models here. The old model of selling was what most people were brought up on. This is what I was trained on, by the way, when I was a young man. It was developed in the 20s and 30s and crystallized in the 50s, taught to everybody. All the sales trainers, like drinking out of the same bathtub, taught the same methodologies. And throughout the 60s, it was the most popular model. It became ancient in the 70s and was obsolete by the beginning of the 80s. And in watching the videotapes, we find that it's not used by top salespeople, and it's mostly attempted by amateurs and by old line salespeople who should have retired. If ever you want to see the old model of selling, you can take your children down to a used car lot on a side street on the poor parts of town, and the Neanderthals that come out from under the rocks in the back will come out and try the old model on you, dragging their clubs and wearing their animal skins. Am I trying to discourage you from using this old model? Bet your bippy. Okay, the first 10% of the old model was establishing rapport. Hi, how are you? How's it going? Let's get right down to the purpose of the business. Make me an offer. You like it? Make me an offer. Let's get on with it right now. What's holding you back from buying? Make you a good deal. What do I have to do to get the business today? What price do I have to do? I'll match any price that you can offer. Have you heard these? This is one of the surest ways to get an opportunity to see the outside of the building. And again, we've talked with thousands of customers on this. Number 20% of the sale, the next level, is qualifying. Find out if they've got the money before you waste any time with them. However, today we know that if a person will talk to you seriously about your product or service, they're probably qualified to buy it. The question is whether or not they want it badly enough. And that's very much a matter of your sales process. The third part, in the old model, 30% of the sale was presenting. And that's where you used a series of what they used to call sales judo techniques to get the person, twist them around, roll the eyeballs, raise your voice, drop the voice down, use smart-ass questions, flip the whip, whap, boom, get the sale and get out of there and get that check franked before they change their mind. The old model techniques, by the way, were so effective that almost every state now has a 72-hour law. That a sale can be invalidated within 72 hours because they became so aggressive, because most people are not confrontative. Most people are pretty pleasant. And they became so aggressive and so tricky that you had to have time to think it over because too many people were being victimized. And the last part of the old model was closing. And we were told buyers are liars, so close them early and often. I know you've never heard such an expression here in San Jose or where you come from, but this was very common. Now, in the 70s, the model flipped. It morphed. It morphed from this to, and it flipped. But basically, the new model is very different. The new model is how women sell, which is why women are so successful in sales. The new model is how all the highest paid men sell. The new model is the future of selling. The new model is the 21st century. And here it is. It's also in 4 parts. The sale is in 4 parts. The first 40% of the new model is developing trust. And why is that so important? It's because trust is the glue that holds all relationships together. People in relationships trust each other. Trust between parents, trust between children, trust between employer and employee, trust between bankers and companies, trust between you and your customers. Trust when you're selling promises is absolutely critical. So trust is the glue that holds relationships together. The finest relationships you have are the ones characterized by the highest level of trust and confidence. They're the most important thing. They are the true riches of life. is the relationships you have with people that you trust and who trust you. Very, very important. The second part of the new model of selling, 30%, is identifying needs. And we've learned a most remarkable thing, is that when you focus on the customer's needs by asking well-prepared questions and you listen attentively to the answers and allow the customer to talk, the customer trusts you more. And the more the customer trusts you like a flower in the sun, the more the customer opens up to you and will answer your questions more and more honestly, and then will eventually tell you all the things you need to know in order to help him or her make an intelligent buying decision. So the more you focused on needs, the more the customer trusts you. What's the mistake that salespeople make? They talk about themselves and their company and their products and their services and their background, their history and everything. What's the smart thing that professionals do? They ask questions of the customer and his or her situation. They focus totally on understanding where the customer is coming from. The third part, 20% of the sales process, is presenting. But presenting in the new model is very simple. It's where you show the customer how the needs that you and the customer have mutually identified can be satisfied with your product or service. Mr. Prospect, based on what you've told me, I think we can be of some help to you. For example, what we have here will do exactly this for you. And if your product does 10 things, and your customer has only indicated that your customer needs 2, then you only talk about the 2. The other things are interesting as well, but the 2 are critical. And so you only talk about what is really important to the customer. And the last part, the last 10% of the new model is confirming. Does this make sense to you? Is this what you had in mind? Is this an improvement on what you're doing today? And so on. So those are the 4 stages. Now, here's a good question. How far into the sales conversation do you begin talking about your product or service at all? 70%. Calculators may be used for those of you in the back. But the fact of the matter is that you have to be 70% of the way into the presentation before you even start talking about your product or service, because you don't even know if the customer wants it or needs it yet. It's only when you've done the need analysis and the customer has reached need recognition, which is the psychological critical mass where basically the Bombay doors open up and the customer is ready to listen to you talk about your product or service. Up until that time, you leave your materials aside. By the way, here's a very simple technique in selling. It's called going in naked. It's a very powerful technique that is used by the top 10% of salespeople. If you've never done it, try it just once. I have done million-dollar deals on this technique. It's very powerful. You have the appointment, you go in to see the customer for the first time, and you walk in with nothing. Going in naked means empty-handed. It's just a way of getting you to remember it. So you go in with nothing in your hands. They say, "Where's your briefcase?" You say, "I won't need my briefcase because I'm really not here to sell you anything. I'm here more, I see myself more as a consultant, and what I would like to do is maybe ask you a couple of questions and see if we can't help you achieve your goals in a cost-effective way. But I'm not here to sell you anything." Oh. If you're not there to sell anything, it's like open hands. You know, open hands comes from medieval days in Western civilization where you showed your hands, it was clear that you didn't have a weapon. Today, unconsciously, when a person opens their hands, we think they're more honest. So when you open your hands, it means open, honest, trustworthy, nothing to hide. And you don't need a briefcase. Leave it in your car. And then all you have to have is one piece of paper, and on it you have your letterhead, the name of the person, their title, their company, the time and date and place of the appointment. And then you have on this list, you have between either 3, 5, or 7 questions. Odd numbers are better than even numbers. So just 3, 5, or 7 questions. By the way, I've prepared a quick agenda for you and I know how busy you are, so I've prepared some questions that we might go over to determine whether or not we can be of some help to you. And then you pull this out, and you have 2 copies. You give them one. The questions are very carefully calibrated from general to specific. They move in a logical progression. And the customer sits there with an agenda, and you've got an agenda, and the customer thinks, "My God, a professional. I've been in this business for years. This is the first real pro I've ever seen. Could I get a camera?" Because an agenda is great. And then what you do is you follow the agenda. You can deviate from the agenda. You can ask follow-up questions and so on. But you have an agenda. The customer says, "Geez, this is going to be a conversation where the person knows where they are and where they're going from." And the last question can be, "What do you feel we should do from here?" Or "What do you feel the next step should be?" Or "What would you like to do as the next step?" In other words, you can design your questions and you can perfect them over time, and agenda closed will knock your eyes out. It is so professional. Person says, well, what if you do a really good presentation, you get along fine and everything's fine, and they want to buy your product or service and you don't have your briefcase? Well, you nitwit, you go back to your car and get your briefcase. That's what you do. You deadhead. Jeez. How did you get out for the weekend? Okay. No, they checked passes. All right. Now here's the rule. Number 9, the rule is that listening builds trust. Listening builds trust. Talking doesn't build trust. Listening builds trust. Now here are the listening skills for sales success. Number 10, listening skill number 1, A, is listen attentively. Listening builds trust. Listen attentively. Listen without interruptions. Listen and lean forward. Listen patiently. Nod, smile, agree, lean forward. Face the person directly. The more closely you listen to another person, the better they feel. The better they feel, the more they like and trust you. And even if a customer is complaining, listen attentively and nod, smile, and don't interrupt. Nothing more flattering than a person who listens and hangs on every word. When two people are in love, by the way, the ultimate of listening is expressed. The two people hang on each other's words throughout the entire process of falling in love. They're just enraptured with each other. And when you are totally enraptured with what the customer is saying, the customer feels better and better and better about himself. We find that a person who is listened to closely actually feels their self-esteem going up. They like themselves more and more, and they like the person they're with who's causing them to feel this way. So listening attentively is critical. B is pause before replying. Pause before replying. Pause 3 to 5 seconds. Don't feel you have to answer, just pause. Use silence. Silence is very powerful. Salespeople must become comfortable with silence. Don't feel that you have to fill every moment. And when you pause, you actually hear the person better. You actually tell them you're considering what they have to say, and you avoid the possibility of interrupting them. C is question for clarification. And the very best question for clarification is, how do you mean? How do you mean? Cost too much. How do you mean? We're not interested. How do you mean? We're not in the market right now. How do you mean? We're quite happy with our existing supplier. How do you mean? Just how do you mean is they call it the universal question. You can use it in response to any comment that the customer gives you. And what is the rule? The person who asks questions has control. So when the customer says, I don't want it, I don't need it, can't use it, can't afford it, how do you mean? Whatever the customer says, how do you mean? We don't have it in our budget, how do you mean? Does that mean you don't have it in your budget this moment, but by next quarter, which starts the week after next, you will? How do you mean? In other words, how do you mean? I hate your industry, I hate your company, I hate your products and services, quite honestly, I hate you. How do you mean exactly? How do you mean is wonderful because when you ask the question, how do you mean, the customer will expand on what they just said, which gives you a chance to listen, and listening builds trust. And trust is the foundation of all good relationships, especially sales relationships. D is feed it back, paraphrase it in your own words. Feed it back, paraphrase it in your own words. Remember, it is only when you paraphrase it in your own words that you prove that you were listening. Up to now, you may have been faking it. Everybody here, this is called the acid test of listening. This is the proof. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you demonstrate you were listening. Remember, everybody's had an experience of working with what is called a phony listener. Where they go, took a Dale Carnegie course, yes, and then you say, well, what about this, what about that? They go, They weren't listening at all. And it's so insulting when that happens. So if at the end of the conversation you pause before replying, you question for clarification, and then you say, well, let me make sure I understand exactly where you're coming from. What you're doing now is this, and what your plans for the future are is that, and what you may be looking for is this, and what you might be interested in would be something like this. Is that correct? When the customer says, yes, that's it. I mean, that's a pretty good restatement. That's it. Then the customer knows that you are really listening. Then you have built trust dramatically, and it puts you much closer to doing a deal if a deal is possible. So remember those 4 parts. Feed it back. Don't rush in. Don't rush in. Make it clear to the customer that you did hear him or her. Now, number 11, and this is one of the most important parts of all, is mega credibility. We say it takes credibility for you to get a hearing, but it takes mega credibility for you to get a sale. In today's market, because of the predominance of risk, your credibility has to be at an inordinate level for the customer to feel comfortable enough to go ahead, to move out of the comfort zone, to take a chance, to face the risk, to face the failure, to face the criticism of a poor decision. So here are some of the ways that you build credibility. And the rule with regard to credibility is everything counts. And all the time we're talking, please don't ever say, oh, well, that doesn't matter, or that's not important, or I don't have to do that, just because you're not accustomed to doing it, or just because you don't like doing it, or for whatever reason. Never dismiss an idea simply because it's outside your comfort zone. Recognize that in selling, everything counts. We're selling promises in exchange for money. Everything counts. Everything counts. Everything counts. So here are the things that count. A is the salesperson. You are a major form of credibility. Terribly important. How you look, how you walk, how you talk, your attitude, your appearance, your dress. And the rule with regard to mega credibility is always dress for success. Go out and get a book on the subject. There's some wonderful books written on how to dress for success in business, in all levels of business, dealing with all kinds of clients. You'll find that all the best image consultants will tell you, if you're selling to law firms, dress a particular way. If you're selling to medical offices, dress a particular way. If you're selling in homes, dress a particular way. If you're selling roofing, dress a different way from if you were selling computers, and so on. But there is a dress, and it's very important, a dress that signals credibility, honesty, believability, reliability, intelligence, knowledgeability, and so on. And there are mistakes that you can make in dress that jar a person, like hitting a record player and the needle going and starting over again. And so therefore, every salesperson must dress for success. 95% of the first impression that you make in selling is contained in your dress. Why should that be? Because on a good day, your dress covers 95% of your body. So therefore, take the time to look good, groom well, polish your shoes. It's an interesting thing. 84% of executives, senior executives in a recent survey once said they would not promote a person whose shoes were scuffed. They are meticulous about polishing their shoes, and if they felt a person had scuffy shoes, they were not reliable for a promotion. They would not buy from people with scuffy shoes. They would not buy from people who did not dress properly in the proper colors. So it's very important. I know enough. I can talk about image all day long. I can go in any room, I can walk through, and I can tell who's making the money and who's not. I have worked with companies, and I've worked with salespeople, and I've shown them how, if you're really open, I'll tell you what, change this, this, and this, and they come back 2 months later and they've doubled their income. Very small modifications in appearance and grooming will just, boom, put a person on the fast track, and they never knew it, and nobody will tell them. Who's going to tell you? I'm sorry, sir, you look a bit dorkish. Your friends aren't going to tell you. Your boss isn't going to tell you. Your customers aren't going to tell you. So a person walks along with a mistake. I had a friend who's from India, a really, really great guy. He was a very hard-working person. He was very intelligent, and he was very knowledgeable, nice personality, pleasant, and he couldn't make sales. He was so exasperated. He just worked his head hard out. He eventually made enough to get by, but he wasn't successful, and he knew he was more dedicated. He listened to BrianTracy tapes in his car. Obviously a serious player. And when I shook hands with him, I knew what the problem was. In India, we don't shake hands, we say namaste. Shaking hands is a Western custom. You don't shake hands. So therefore, when he came to the West and people held out their hand, he held out his hand as though it was dead from the wrist down. It was just a social thing where you just held out your hand when other people held out their hands. And the instant he held out his hand, the person would say, hi, it's nice to see you. Abdul, boom. The hand would they would just turn off. And I said, you have to understand that this is a critical part of our culture. It's just like in Europe, when you meet people, you shake hands when you meet them, and you shake hands when you say goodbye to them, and you shake hands when you meet them again and goodbye to them, and every single time you meet them and see them, you shake hands with them. I mean, it is just normal and natural. And if you don't, it is a sign of uncouth behavior and gross rudeness. It's an insult. And if you shake hands once with people when you meet them in our society, in India, they don't shake hands at all. So he began practicing. And he just began practicing shaking hands. He'd have to remind himself, but practice makes perfect. Pretty soon his handshake was as solid as a lumberjack's handshake. He got squeezers and he made, and something in sales just went boom, 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 boom. Every other skill he had was possible, but nobody wanted to tell him. Of course, he never spoke to me again either. But now B is the company, and the key parts of the company are reputation and longevity and size. Remember, the reputation is 84%. If your company has a good reputation, brag on your company. Talk about how good your company is, how long you've been in business, how many repeat sales you have from satisfied customers, how fast you've grown, and how proud you are of what a fine company you have. If people don't know about your company, tell them about your company. Let them know. C is testimonials, letters, lists, and photographs. A testimonial letter will get you 80% of the way to a sale. Tremendous form of mega credibility is if you say, by the way, that your product or service is good, people say, what would I expect you to say? Do you know have you heard of the legal expression called puffery? Has everybody heard of puffery? I've taken commercial law. I've taken lots of things. I've gotten over most of them. But in selling, we have misrepresentation, and there are two parts of misrepresentation: innocent misrepresentation and false misrepresentation. Either of those are grounds for setting aside a sale. You said your product would do such and such, and it turned out it wouldn't do it. But I thought it did. My boss told me it did. It's innocent misrepresentation. You weren't trying to fool anybody, but the bottom line was what you bought was not what you bought. So a judge will set it aside. Fraudulent misrepresentation is it won't do it, and you say it will anyway, and you know for sure. That's where the tobacco industry is having a little bit of a challenge right now. It's a question. And then the third is puffery. Now, a person says, he came in here, he said this is the best product in the whole darn Northern California. You just couldn't get a better product on the West Coast. And I turned out that there was a better product sold by a company in Newark, New Jersey, and so on. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Judge will say, out, 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 out. That's puffery. Salespeople are allowed to puff their product. It's not a grounds for setting aside the sale. It's puffery. So everybody assumes that what salespeople say is puffery. Or at least it has a little in it, Just it's got some in there. Like the Irish say that you have a little bit of blarney. Whenever you're talking, you have a bit of blarney. It's just assumed that what you're saying is puffed a little bit. So therefore, if you say something about your product or service, okay, maybe so, maybe no. But if a customer says something in a letter, on their letterhead, that your product or service is good, the prices are fair, and we've been very happy in dealing with you, that's true. That's admissible in court. So therefore, if you can get testimonial letters, and you can get them by asking for them, show them to your customers. We say testimonial letters are so effective in selling that salespeople who don't use testimonial letters have skinny kids. Now, D is the presentation. The presentation is customer-focused, practiced, and rehearsed, and practiced and prepared. What's the most important word in a sales presentation? Yes, the most important word is the word you. So the whole conversation revolves around you. You. And so therefore, a really good presentation is focused on you, the customer, and your situation, and what you said, and what you're trying to accomplish, and where you're coming from, and where you're going, rather than me, us, our. So keep focused on the customer. Tremendous form of mega credibility is a very strong customer-focused presentation. Finally, E, A, B, C, D, E, is the product. Now, the product, if it is really, really good, can overcome virtually everything else. The whole purpose of marketing, according to Peter Drucker, is to make selling unnecessary. If the marketing is extraordinary, then the selling is unnecessary, because the marketing so creates and pinpoints the need or demand so that the customer sees it and buys it, and the salesperson is irrelevant. I'll just take it. And some products often get like that. For instance, did they have to sell Color Me Elmo or whatever that doll was? What was it? Tickle Me Elmo? Didn't tickle me Elmo. Didn't have to sell that, because what happened is that craze started over that, like Cabbage Patch dolls a few years ago. You know that they were flying 747s from Korea with Cabbage Patch dolls in the seats? Can you imagine that? Bags full of Cabbage Patch dolls, seat belted into the seats, whole damn 747 full of Cabbage Patch dolls to get them over here before the Christmas rush was over. I mean, that's how well they were selling. 747s full? Can you imagine that? Anyway, so the product was so good that it didn't need to be marketed. Your job is to show that the product is the ideal solution and that the value outweighs the price. The value outweighs the price. It's clear that the value, you get far more in use value than you pay for in dollar cost. That's the key to mega credibility. And remember the rule. This is the rule for success for the rest of your career. Everything counts. Everything counts. Everything helps or hurts. Everything adds up or takes away. Everything counts. Everything counts. Everything counts.
This is the end of this disc. The program continues on the next CD.